What's going on, guys? We like to clap here, and we're talking about the podcast, or we're on a podcast.
Today we're doing the podcast, Manhead.
Heads of men. That's why we call it that.
Yep.
The greatest thinkers in the world.
Yep, we're the true philosophers of the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to expound on the ideas of the past and change the trajectory of the future.
We're going to overshadow people like Immanuel Kant,
Socrates,
Plato,
Camus,
yes.
Nietzsche.
Yeah.
You're going to forget all those names because you probably didn't even know them in the first place.
Yeah. Kierkegaard. Nietzsche.
Okay, who cares about our philosophical knowledge?
Who else? Who else is an obscure one? Anyways, so welcome back to Manhead. We're going to be talking about some misinformation. Well, about misinformation itself, because I think it's a pretty interesting topic. I have quite a bit to say about it, and I wanted to know what you think and what you guys think. So let us know what you think in the comments. Even though I say us, even though it's my channel.
True.
But I like to be virtuous and like to expound on the ownership.
The crazy thing is that you just spread misinformation right there.
True.
You don't want to talk about misinformation. You want to do misinformation.
I want to spread it.
Exactly. Whoa.
Pause.
Hey, yo.
So basically, what I wanted to talk about is like the most troubling thing about misinformation is how believable it is. Because like there's a lot of things that are misrepresented because that's the main course that misinformation uses is misrepresentation, not necessarily false information, just representing it in a false way, right?
Yeah.
So like for like gun violence, like people on the left say all the time that gun violence is at an all-time high, blah blah blah. But if you look at the raw numbers, and then you see like the percentage of like gun violence in comparison to how many guns there are, or how many people have, like at least from what I remember, it was for schools, for example, right? Mm-hmm. The amount of mass shootings that happens at schools, the percentage of schools that get mass shootings, or like, so basically what I did was I saw the raw number of mass shootings.
Okay.
And then I saw the raw number of schools, right? And then I did the math. What percentage of schools get mass shootings? Mm-hmm. And so when I did the math, it was 0.000006%, which, like by any other metric where we measure something else, that's like amazing, right? But then as soon as we talk about guns, we don't want to look at the percentages. We don't want to look at like the rates of how it's happening.
Well, it'll be specific percentages, right? Oh, well, school shootings went up 50% from this year to last year. It's like, what's that number represent, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because even though it could be true, the overall percentage of mass shootings is not that much. Well, with schools, I mean.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is the fixation on assault rifles.
Yeah.
I feel like that's really weird, like especially because
it's fear mongering.
Yeah. And of course, I think the one thing that's done by both sides all the time is using children.
Yeah.
To be using children as political pawns just to push some type of agenda.
Yeah.
And I think most people, at least the people that I know that are for gun control, and like they have genuine hearts of wanting to help children and save the children, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's good intent behind it. I just wish we could have a more, but because there's like the emotional aspect behind it, there's a lack of nuance, right? So it's like, well, assault rifles account for a small percentage of
like gun violence,
of overall gun violence. Yeah, the number one thing that does that's used for gun violence is handguns. Yeah. So I think it's like and there's just so many different ways to like look at the numbers as well, that you can make something look better or worse, right? Like the way you looked at it is like, okay, some might some might say like, well, you're doing it in a biased way. We're not looking at it. We're looking at the fact that this is even a problem that we have to look at.
But the thing
Like
is, I was going to bring that up too. Actually, is well, the counter argument to what I said is, well, there shouldn't be mass shootings at schools at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, would we apply that standard to anywhere else or anything else? We are a country that has a lot of guns. I think more people than guns, and the fact that we have so many guns and the percentage of like schools experiences that is so low, I think it shows a lot. I think that's something that should be in consideration, not something that should be ignored. Not this standard that, oh, no, no, there should never be any mass shootings anywhere, not even at schools. It's a ridiculous standard. I think.
Yeah, because I mean, how many kids die in car accidents?
Yeah, exactly.
We're not saying no cars, right? But of course, that's completely. It's different, but
it is different.
But I think that.
But it's a ridiculous standard.
Is that really misinformation though?
I think
in a way it's more like almost like a liable mission, where like you're saying one part while excluding the other side of it.
I think to be more particular, it's like fear mongering using information, and I think I would say that falsely representing. Well, I guess it depends on your perspective, right? Because someone might look at those numbers that I mentioned earlier and just want to look at the wrong numbers, and then they might see that as a legitimate way to represent the numbers. But for someone like me, I feel like you're misrepresenting the numbers, and I feel like any person that is actually engaged and cares about the topic wants to look at more than just raw numbers.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. Let's say the percentage of mass shootings is like, because you said it was 0.0 whatever, right?
Yeah.
What if it was 1%?
Well, 1% would be pretty damn high.
Yeah, would you be like, oh, it's still not a big number?
That's a good question.
Because then the reason I ask is because there's always going to be the question of the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
Like we have the right to bear arms, and that's never going to be taken away. Like with the way that the political
environment is.
Yeah, the way the political environment is today, there's just no way we're getting. There's no way we're getting rid of guns. There's no way we're getting rid of the Second Amendment. And there's a question to be asked: is like,
nor do I think they should, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. But there's a question to be asked of like what responsibilities and what externalities, like negative side effects, are we willing to accept for that right?
Yeah, the thing is,
because we have the right to drive, but with that comes a lot of deaths by car. Like there's a lot of car accidents, and like we accept that. It's like, okay, that's kind of just part of being able to drive. So would you is it like, oh, is it going to come out to be like, well, gun violence is just a part of having the right to own guns?
Yeah, I mean, there was a study that because I did quite a bit of research on this topic, and there was a study I found. I use Google Scholar. I like to look at scholarly resources every now and then, depending on the topic. And I think for guns, it's a very applicable way to do the research, all right? Because there are a lot of people do research in gun violence, blah blah blah. And then someone did a study. If I could find it for you, so you could like probably put it on the like video as like here's the source basically, so people know I'm not just talking out my ass. But it was a study showing the correlation between more guns and then more gun violence. And so when I was looking through the research, the abstract said that they found that more guns does mean more gun violence, which and intuitively you would assume, right?
Yeah.
But if you read their research, how they did it, and then the numbers they came out to, it says in their research that when it came to like the statistical standard deviations, it wasn't a significant like correlation at all. Like there was
And like, correlation doesn't mean causation.
Exactly. So which means the number of guns that went up didn't directly convert to how many the increase in gun violence, even though they say that.
Yeah.
So, because you do have to be honest in these scholarly art and these scholarly researches, right?
Well, yeah, they have very high standards.
Yeah, and it's going to be reviewed, and so they could like what they said was somewhat true, and like some other like ways, and some other numbers, like if you kind of extrapolate, in my opinion, if you kind of extrapolate, or like try to like it's a stretch is basically what I'm trying to say, is that increased guns means a proportional amount of gun violence.
Yeah, but like it's gonna be 1-to-1.
Yeah, but the numbers didn't show that. They didn't show that it was a very it increased it in a substantive way at all. So that's another thing too, is the research, doing genuine research about it is really hard, because you have to not only know where to look, you have to read what the resources, and know what they're doing and saying.
Yeah, because if you don't know how the research is done, it could be misrepresented. It could be misrepresentative of reality.
Yeah.
But what's the point of misinformation? It's like, well, the average person is not going to do that. 100%. The average voter is not going to do that.
Yeah.
And especially nowadays, what I've noticed, and I think we kind of all know to be true, is that people choose a political party and they ride that line hardcore.
Hardcore,
right?
Yeah.
I'm voting Democrat from top to bottom. It doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
City council is not partisan. Well, I'm gonna go figure out which one is who supports them. Does the Democratic club support them, or does the Republican club support them?
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's kind of disappointing, because at the end of the day, that leaves us more susceptible to misinformation, right? Because if our group is accepting some type of misinformation, then you're gonna be looked down upon.
Yeah, you're gonna be going against the grain.
Exactly, and so then there's a social pressure to accept that.
Yeah.
As well. So
that's the really unfortunate part too, is that when misinformation is accepted as truth, and then you try to question it, you are like put in your place socially, right?
Yeah, like you're
like you get ostracized a little bit.
Yeah, your position of like Republican or Democrat
is questioned.
Exactly. And it's ridiculous. It's like, well, these labels are just representative of like the general direction that I'm in, right?
Yeah.
It's not the fact that I'm gonna be Democrat no matter who, blue no matter who, but Democrats are the ones I agree with more.
Yeah. But and despite me mentioning the gun thing as an example, like me and James lean a little more Democrat, but
I would say I lean a lot more.
I lean a little bit Democrat, I would say personally, but just so we don't have like people confused, like, oh, he's talking about gun rights, blah blah blah, and he's calling himself a Democrat. It's like that's
the label is irrelevant.
It's super irrelevant. It's like I have my own political views, right, and I base them off of what I believe, you know, and whether that aligns with Democrat or Republican is completely arbitrary.
Yeah, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter to me. Like, usually, the sad thing too is, like you said, I'm gonna be voting Democrat no matter who it is. Like,
not only or Republican, depending on the course, it could be the same Republican.
Not only that, though, people will ascribe their own values to the party that they believe they're in, right? So, if you believe that you are Republican, and then because you're super strong on one issue, then now you feel like, due to social pressures, that you need to be super strong on every other issue.
Yeah.
So if you're pro-gun, then you also must be pro-life. You must also be
pro build a wall.
Yeah, like against mass immigration, whatever that means. And like all these other things, like you're aligned lockstep with everything. But as soon as you aren't, then like we mentioned earlier, you're like ostracized for it, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is super cringe. like the echo chamber. It's so easy to fall into it.
Yeah.
You know, because it's easy. That's another thing about misinformation. It's easy to believe when it contorts with your perception of reality.
Yeah.
But the key word there is it's your perception of reality, right? Your perception might not be correct.
Well, isn't perception reality?
Yeah, true. I perceive that you're fucking flusty.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's not. I want to talk more about the gun issue, but you're more talking about the misinformation part.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to continue on the gun thing, you can.
Because I think that's an interesting question. Is like, let's say 1% of schools do get shot up.
Yeah. Well,
is that like, oh well, that's kind of what we have to have. Like,
the thing is,
comes with our rights.
Yeah, the thing is with that is you have to see. I think is the regulation. The question is, do we not have enough regulation, or is there something else we're not looking at that is causing this gun violence? Because I believe that we have plenty gun regulation. You know, so and when you look at the numbers of like homicide, of gun violence, right? Like 46% of it is homicides for gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
Like 55% is suicide. And unfortunately, like a majority of that 55% are men.
Yeah.
So I think the real issue is like mental health, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because like it's men's mental health in particular.
Yeah.
Because men are the ones that are generally taking their lives in these extreme ways. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people really care about that, unfortunately. Because even like men that say that they're men's rights activists, but they don't give any real solutions. They say, "Oh, go to God," or "Oh, they just don't give any real like solutions."
No, Christian, God is the answer.
It is a real solution.
He is the answer.
Alhamdulillah.
I don't know. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, for me, I think the actual solution, or at least one approach that I think needs to be taken, is like men talking about how they feel more. And because even when you're in a social setting and you've made a tight network of friends, a lot of the time, like you don't talk about how you feel because like even if it's a joke, a lot of the time we do joke around with each other saying like, "Oh, stop being a bitch, bro. Oh, stop being a pussy. Oh, blah blah blah. Don't just toughen up, man up." And I think that's part of the reason why men fucking off themselves, you know? And
yeah, because they lack the capacity to do that, to express themselves in a way that's like actually relieving, like a way that relieves their emotions,
exactly,
rather than just being more pent up and like just getting more and more bitter or angry or whatever,
yeah,
or
because
depressed or sad.
Another thing too is that people say that women are emotional. It's like, then why do guys kill themselves so much?
I mean, men are emotional. Men and women are both emotional. They're just in different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I would say like killing yourself is a very emotional thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Getting angry is something that people look at and don't consider like being emotional.
Yeah.
Which I think is ridiculous. But I think that's because it contorts with this perception of like what a man is. A man defends himself. A man is strong and can conquer. You know, but in today's day and age, it's like what conquer? What am I gonna do? Go colonize my neighbor?
Yeah.
Like, what are you saying?
Yeah. So do you just want to completely move off the topic of misinformation then? I just want to make that clear so that we don't like.
Yeah, we're kind of all over the place.
Jump back and forth. Is there anything else you wanted to say about misinformation? Or
so that's the thing too is another reason I mentioned misinformation is that the real issue with gun violence is, I think, mental health. Because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the research that's done, like you find out that mental health is a big thing that leads men to kill themselves, which is the majority of like, or I don't know about a majority, but is a huge portion of gun violence.
Yeah.
But because it's not a super simple solution, people don't really care. like, oh, if guns are the actual issue, just ban guns. That seems like a super simple.
But then what am I gonna do? They're just gonna like jump off a bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so that's why I want to talk about misinformation, and I want to know what you think about, like, do you think people, when they represent something, like they show raw numbers or they show percentages or they show like multiplications of things, do you think they're doing that in a genuine way? Like they think like, oh, this is the real issue.
Yeah. I think most people that, especially like the activists that are pushing for it, are genuine. I think the people that follow them are genuine. I think their emotions are what lead them to that. They're not, and like the thing is, like once you've made up your mind on something like that, it's hard to be like, oh yeah, actually I was wrong. Like how many people do you know on a regular basis say like, yeah, no, actually I was wrong about that, and I changed my mind. I almost never hear anybody say that.
100%.
And I think um, it makes me question like, is it really misinformation or is it just people who are looking for anything to it's like a post? Is it just a post? But is it just a post hoc rationalization issue?
Yeah.
Like, are people just trying to justify with whatever they can find, or is it actually like, oh, there's misinformation out there? And I think it's probably a mixture of both.
Yeah.
I feel like, of course, we kind of have to work against human nature to do something like that. So I guess the best way to combat it is to just put it out the right information. But
Yeah,
it's just like it's so hard. There's just so much out there. It's like there's like movements to ban guns. There are whole movements to to and like I said before, it's like so emotionally invested because it's like children. They're talking about children, and it's like
that's the problem too.
Well, because if you're against gun control, that means you want children to die.
Yeah.
That's how they see it, right?
Yeah.
And if you question it, it's like you want kids to die. That's all they hear. And it's like, well, how are you supposed to argue against something like that? No one's ever going to listen to you.
100%. If you're talking to someone that views you that way, they're not going to listen to you, right?
No.
And it's hard to get people out of that mindset. It's like, no, I'm trying to look at things in a very, like, as objective as I can be, but also as reasonable as I can be.
Yeah.
At least from my point of view, because like I said, with the 0.00006% of schools that face mass shootings, it's like a total nothing burger, basically.
Yeah.
But that's the unfortunate part because no one really cares. They just say stupid shit like there should be no mass shootings ever. It's like you wouldn't have that standard about anything. Oh, like with cops, people think, oh, all cops are bad cops just because like there's one bad cop in like your area and you can't really do anything about it because you're not in charge of another bad cop.
Yeah.
The best you could do is try to like stop them. But even then, you would need to be there.
Yeah.
And it's just so dumb. There's when there's a possibility for something to go wrong, like it will go wrong, and like no matter how low the percentage is, right? I think
at one point or another. Yeah.
I think especially when it's such a big thing,
like America, like all of America.
Yeah, it's such a systemic thing, right? It's like expecting what would be something analogous to probably, let me think, like fireworks, right? Let's say like we allow fireworks to be sold. There's regulations on them, obviously, and that differs from state to state. But that's not going to stop. Like that doesn't mean there's never going to be any accidents that come from fireworks, right?
Yeah.
Then no one would ever expect that standard.
Yeah.
And to expect that standard in something like guns, it's like why?
Yeah, because if we apply that standard to anything, we get rid of everything.
Exactly. Because no one applies that to like what you said, cars. They don't apply it to knives,
kitchens.
Yeah.
Mechanics,
like grills, like fires,
labor, work. Everything has a risk to it.
Exactly.
People die on the job all the time.
What are we gonna do? Stop working?
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind.
These kids don't have to do child labor.
Yeah, right.
But I wanted to talk about one thing.
Okay.
For the last like bit of this. Did you want to say something else?
No, that's basically it. I think. Oh, just to wrap up that
Yeah, just
point
wrap it up.
is yeah, I think unfortunately misinformation is really hard to fall into. It's really easy to believe, and it's also really hard to check yourself. You know, because it contorts with what you believe. So of course it must be true.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I know this to be true, so it must be true. Like this
exactly.
information, yeah. But
But then once you look, like if you have a strong conviction about something, do the research. Like look into it. Don't just believe word of mouth. Because unfortunately, a lot of people, like even smart people, will believe things because they think it's right,
yeah,
because they feel like it contorts with their perception of reality. Um, so I would say, and if you should ask yourself, do I fall into that category? Do I believe something really strong and have strong convictions, but don't have any reason to, like, besides like my emotional
yeah.
state of mind?
Can't cite a study.
Yeah, research,
Can't
like
cite
any scholarly research, just even like normative, like just
or scholarly people.
yeah, people, or even just some regular guy or articles, right? Like if you don't even have like normal articles to back up what you're saying, then do you really like have any basis for what you believe?
Yeah,
But yeah, ask yourself that.
and the only reason we bring up the gun issue is because it's like probably one of the easiest ones on our minds that we could talk about. There's so
Yeah,
many other issues. I could go off.
on the left and right.
Yeah, I could go off on immigration
Oh my
on
goodness.
the same exact thing, right? There's
Yeah.
just so much misinformation about that, and of course that's more like a right wing like propaganda thing too. So like it's not just about we just want to focus on one thing
Yeah.
to kind of represent the point of
Yeah.
misinformation. But so as you know, I've been door knocking,
Mm-hmm.
and one thing I like about door knocking is I'm like getting to know people around the area, you know, whether it's Oceanside, Vista, wherever. Not to dox myself, I might just edit that part out.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things. So yesterday I was outdoor knocking, and the last door that I knocked on was this lady,
Mm-hmm.
and of course I give the whole spiel of like who I'm campaigning for, and I asked if they plan on voting for him and blah
Mm-hmm.
blah blah. I give my spiel, and then she starts asking um, she starts talking about like, well, the because there was a specific issue that he did for the city. It was like a year round homeless shelter that he helped open,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she started talking about that and homelessness, and she said that she's a veteran and how a lot of veterans are actually part of that homeless demographic. And I
Yeah.
think, and she was talking about like the difference in the way that people see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like whether it's people there are people that say that are very like that lack a lot of sympathy, that say, oh well, they need to get off their ass and get a job or this, and there are people like us who might say like, well, there's a much deeper issue than that. Like they're not just choosing not to work. A lot of them are like addicted to drugs and have mental health issues,
Or don't
or
know how to they're financially illiterate.
yeah, exactly. And then maybe, and she mentioned like how well someone could have like been living paycheck to paycheck, and this one paycheck just wasn't enough, and now they're fucked. And one of the things that she talked about too, which I thought was really insightful, was how we don't really think about like, let's say you're doing paperwork for whatever, your loan or a job or anything. Like literally, I guess the more pressing issue would be the job thing. And you don't have an address to put down, like you could be fucked. Like
Yeah.
you can might not even be able to apply for a job because of that.
I mean, we even have uncles that use our email address, right?
Yeah, and then there's
From our
it's like
parents, I
it's a
mean.
domino effect,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just one thing after the other because of that, and a lot of people lack the sympathy to realize that and how hard it is to get out of something like that. And I talked to her about that, and I was like, yeah, I think one of the big issues is that a lot of us feel there's like this very large idea, or I almost want to say like this mass hysteria of individualism.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone thinks they're like everyone thinks they're in their own movie, you
Like
know?
they're the main character, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, no, we're literally like High School Musical. We're all in this together.
True.
And I think like unfortunately and fortunately, we we affect each other whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
We drive on the same roads. People are keeping our lights on. People are keeping the water running. Like
Someone built this room.
yeah, exactly. Like there's so many different things that because in what whether first hand, second or third, we're dealing with other people, you know, and
Every day.
there's this very individualist mindset where like you could literally be the most shut in your room all day by
Recluse,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah, that's not interacting with the world, but because of the nature of everything, like you necessarily are interacting with other people. Like it's just not directly, you know.
Yeah.
Like and
Whether it's something they made for you, something that they inspired, and then something was created because of it.
yeah, whether it's the phone you jerk off with, because
Yeah.
or the porn stars you're watching, someone did something, you
Or
know.
that website that it's on.
Yeah, yeah, and like I think there's like this very much like it is very American to think like, oh well, I'm gonna get mine and fuck everybody else, you know.
Yeah. It's like
And
pick yourself up by the bootstrap mentality.
yeah, and I think that individualism is good to an extent, especially
Yeah.
when you're like very career driven and like you're kind of like in a way you kind of have to be selfish in the way that like that you're gonna pursue higher levels of your career, even though it might um because like people might be competing for the same position, you know, like
Yeah.
you kind of have to be individualistic in that way and like a little more selfish, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in other ways, it's like, well, what about the community around you that's outside of work or outside of your career? Like, what are you doing to help the people around you? Like, do you give a hand to people? Do you like? I see a homeless man on the street, I'll give him change if I have it. If I'll give him a few dollars. I see people like I see a lady struggling, like
Big whoop, James. You're so good. Oh, you're such a good person. Whatever.
but I just think like people don't think of themselves as a society.
They don't think of themselves as a part of a system. Yeah.
Yeah, or like a culture, and like we really are, you know. And I just wish that we could kind of separate the two into their proper categories, you know. Like I'm gonna be individualistic when I need to be, and as socially driven when I don't.
Like a gear switch, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because there are definitely like if you're in a competition, obviously be individualistic. If you're fighting for a job, obviously be individualistic. But if it comes down to like, oh, it's a fucking mess in my community. All right, let me do some community service with some people.
yeah.
Or because you could easily just be like, well, I didn't fucking throw that trash there. Why do I need to pick it up? You know. But that's like a very selfish way of thinking, I think.
Yeah, it's not about whether or not you need to. It's like you're kind of already bought into society, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You know, and
why not just try to make it as good as it can be?
Yeah, because if everyone thought that way, we'd have a much better society.
Yeah.
Society. It's so corrupt, man.
We live in a system.
Oh my god.
We live in a society. Anything else to say to wrap this up?
Yeah, I just think I wish that individual, because like one of the things I used to watch a lot too was Jordan Peterson. He very much pushed that individualism idea because there is a negative part to like social groups, like right, we were talking about misinformation,
Yeah,
and how like when you're part of a group that could have negative impacts, and that's a
100%.
perfect example of it. But like, well, it's just we need to think better about when to do what,
Yeah,
when to do which one, and I feel like there's critiques of both, and there's good sides to both. So not to completely shit on individualism, but
because it is important.
yeah, like I mean, I'm very much an individual, like in the way that I like to either dress or look or the way I live my life, like with I don't plan on getting married, and a lot of people don't like that. Like a lot of people have their own opinions on that. It's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna, but at the end of the day, I'm me. I don't give a fuck what anybody else has to say about that.
Yeah,
But
even with like tattoos, I get tattoos because it's what I like, not because what other people think it should be. Right?
yeah, exactly. So if people could just, I wish, I wish it was we would let ourselves be individuals when it doesn't affect anybody else, and realize when we do affect other people.
Yeah, 100%.
If I could put it in the most succinct way, that's like the most succinct way.
Yeah, and I think because like what you mentioned earlier about Jordan Peterson, like I think another thing, one last thing to wrap it all up, I'm gonna mention misinformation again. Is so just because someone is really smart, educated, and qualified in one field doesn't mean they're qualified in everything,
Mm-mm.
right? Because people fall into this trap of like, oh, well, this guy's very well educated. He
Really
knows
smart.
his master's in this, bachelor's in that, blah blah blah, and yeah, he is really smart. Of course, they got that education. They're a professional in what they do.
It takes
But
a smart person to do that.
yeah, but in what they do,
Yeah, not
they're
in
very
everything.
specialized. Like a neuroscience, a
Neurosurgeon.
a neurologist, yeah, a neurosurgeon. He's not gonna be able to tell you like how to do your taxes, right?
Yeah.
Or what to invest in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same way as like someone, what are a broker, I guess.
Yeah.
A broker is gonna tell you how to. What are brokers like the people that sell you stocks? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but people you get financial advice from aren't gonna tell you like I wouldn't like trust them to tell me how to work out, you know?
Yeah, and that label of professionalism can be used in a negative way of like, well, they're
100%.
just saying they're professionals to sway you,
Yeah, 100%.
you know?
Um, like you need to look at what they do, if they're accredited, if they have like if they have things that contort to reality, if it maps onto reality, right? Um, because like if a neurosurgeon tells me that I need to do like 30 reps in for a curl, 3 sets of 30 reps, but only like 5 pounds, and he says, "Oh, well, you'll for sure get gains from that, and you'll be the biggest and strongest person ever." It's like, okay, you could say that, and you are a really smart person.
But you don't know shit about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like bullshit can come from anywhere, even people that are knowledgeable. People are biased, and so be careful on who you believe. Even with what I'm saying, be skeptical, have a healthy amount of skepticism, and have have some basis for what you believe. Think about it. Go a little more, scratch more than just the surface. Go a little deeper.
All right. Thank you for watching. This has been Manhead.
Yeah. Goodbye. Stay safe. Later.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Share. Let us know what you think in the comments. And send us a picture of your butthole.
Yep. Piss, fart, and cum. Thank you.